Hello everyone. Now we will look at a topic which has been in the news as far as marketing is concerned quite recently and has been gaining a lot of ground in terms of its public appeal and in terms of its fame. That is neuromarketing. Before we begin with neuromarketing, let us look at the number of ads that you are exposed to. Do you have any idea the kind of number of ads that you are exposed to on a daily basis? We are roughly exposed to 5,000 ads or branding messages per day. That is, a new ad is displayed to you every 11.52 seconds, which again means that we are bombarded with close to 11 million bits of data every second. But the reality is that we can only process 40 to 50 bits of data in a second. Now, what happens with the remaining? Our brain has a mechanism of ignoring all the other ads or all the other many million bits of branding communications so that it does not result in brain fatigue, which means we see very few of the ads that we are basically exposed to. So every 11.52 seconds, though there are new ads coming up, we hardly notice them. Now this basically makes us question the current state of advertising. Now the traditional channels and new media are providing ample coverage to their brands, but overexposure of this to the consumers is actually doesn't helping us. There are so many different kind of stimuli that a customer is being exposed to that they are now becoming unresponsive towards several ad campaigns. Public feels that these kind of ad campaigns does not actually create any impact on them. And now achieving the top of the mind status is actually a thing of past. People are no longer concerned with this across the globe. And currently, majority of the advertising mediums and promotional mediums are actually not functioning the way they are supposed to function. Let us look at how our brain processes data. It's like this iceberg that is seen on the screen. 90% of the brain's data processing for any kind of decision making is done in a subconscious state, which means most of the time the kind of decisions that we make, we are hardly aware of them. Only 10% is where we actually think about the data that we process before taking a decision. And all our traditional market research activities and advertising activities are only tapping into the 10%. That is the reason why in several instances, the result of real-time behavior is in stark opposition to the research results that we have found out, which means that our research may say that our consumers are behaving towards our product in a very positive manner and they actually want to buy the product and they feel good about the product. But when it actually goes out in the market, you may not see that kind of response. That is because all these market research campaigns or market research surveys and all these advertising campaigns are only looking at 10% of the brain, whereas when the customer actually visits a retail store to purchase your product, he or she is using the remaining 90%, which we have never even touched. So what is neuromarketing? Neuromarketing is a combination of three disciplines, which is marketing, neuroscience and psychology. So if I have to give you if I have to give you a definition of neuromarketing, I would say that it is a branch of neuroscience research that aims to better understand the consumer through his or her cognitive processes, that is thinking processes, and has application in marketing, explaining consumers' preferences, motivations and expectations, predicting their behavior and their success and failures of various advertising messages. So neuromarketing as a whole looks into the customer's thought process. It explains to us why a customer prefers a particular brand or a product. It also gives us an insight into their motivations and expectations from a particular product or service. It helps us predict their behavior, and it also helps us understand whether a particular advertising message will be successful or not basis the response that we get from the consumers. Now, there is another way of defining it, which Thompson has given us in 2003, is like applying methods of neurology, the methods that are applied in a neurology lab to the question of advertising world. Now, this field basically applies neuroscience to marketing. It studies consumer sensory motor or cognitive and affective responses, whatever their thought processes are to various marketing stimuli. So we basically show ads to consumers, and whatever their brain processes, we try to measure that. Now there are various technologies that are used to measure their brain activities. We have fMRI and EEG, which we will look into much more detail in the coming slides. Now, how did this concept of neuromarketing evolve? The concept was first explored by a marketing faculty or marketing professor, Mr. Gerald Zaltman, in 1990s. Zaltman and his associates were actually hired by several companies like Coca-Cola to use these techniques and test these methods and understand whether their advertising messages are hitting the right spot or not. And Zaltman also developed a method called ZMET or ZMET, which is nothing but Zaltman Metaphor Elicitation Technique. Now, this technique was devised with an aim to make a powerful and emotionally appealing ad. And what did basically this method have is that they gave consumers or the test subjects a lot of images and gave them various situations or emotions, and they were asked to pick the images which they felt was more correlating to their image. This way they could identify that which visual imaging triggers which emotion in the consumer's brain, and basis that they designed their ad campaigns in such a manner that it does not just appeal to the consumer's logical sense, but in a more it appeals more to the emotional sense. And that is how the entire neuromarketing concept got evolved. Later on, this term neuromarketing had actually not come out until 2000s, and Bright House, which was one of the marketing firm based in Atlanta, published an article in which this particular term was used for the first time. But apparently there was some issues with the university along with whom they were tied up with, and they had to actually shut down their company and start off something anew. And right now Bright House has changed its name and structure, and they have undergone a complete change in terms of their enterprise. And right now they are working with more than 500 clients in consumer products business. So this is the kind of impact that neuromarketing has had in the past. Now, what are the applications of neuromarketing in neuroscience and marketing? Firstly, it provides us with a confirmatory evidence about the existing of a particular phenomenon. Most of the time we say that in market there is a particular phenomenon regarding a particular product, but we do not have evidences for it. And neuroscience helps us gaining a confirmatory evidence that a particular phenomenon exists in the market. It also helps us generating more fundamental conceptualization and understanding of the underlying process. The purchase process is actually understood on a cognitive level, and it actually gives us a proper outline, a concept on how this entire purchasing process actually works out in the consumer's brain. It also refines existing conceptualization and various phenomena, and it provides methodologies for testing new as well as existing theories. So there are a lot of theories which are being formed in the marketing arena, but we do not have evidences, we do not have ways of testing those theories. Neuroscience actually gives us an opportunity to do all of that. So whatever we did not know till now is what neuroscience is delving into, and that is where it is giving us more and more insights. Now there are various tools that are used in neuromarketing. So there are three types of methodologies that are followed in neuromarketing. Firstly, where we record the brain's metabolic activities, which means that we record how the blood flow that is coming in and out of a brain, the oxygen supply that reaches particular portion of the brains. Then we record brain's electrical activities. Most of us are aware that brain is actually made of nerve cells known as neurons, which communicate to each other through electrical impulses. So any zone of the brain which shows more activity on an electrical signal level will give you an impact or give you a result that this particular emotion has been triggered, which is why this particular area of the brain is more active. And thirdly, we do certain things without recording brain activities. So we do an eye tracking, we do skin conductance, we do facial coding, we do facial electromagnetography, electromyography. There are various techniques that are being used. We will look at a few of these techniques in detail. Firstly, functional magnetic resonance imaging. This is one of the tests where the brain's metabolism is checked. So what it basically does is the consumer is actually shown various images and marketing stimuli, and the brain is scanned using a MRI scanning machine. And in that, what basically the brain tries to see is which portion of the brain gets maximum blood supply. The theory underlying this particular concept is that when the brain is utilizing a particular, or when a particular emotion is triggered, a particular part of the brain activates more, and when the activity in a brain's part is more, the blood supply and the oxygen required for that particular part is more than usual. And that is why fMRI actually tries to pinpoint that particular location where blood flow is more and the oxygen intake is more. It also searches for certain patterns and activities of the brain, and it uses magnetic wave field and radio waves in combination to study various structures. Now this allows us to observe the deep brain structures at times, but it also has a kind of limitation that it only looks at the topical aspect of the brain. It does not go into the neurological level or the nerve cell level or the electrical impulse level of the brain activities. Electroencephalography is basically where we record brain's electrical impulses activity. So primarily it is used for measuring brain's activity in medical professions. And right now what has happened is people are now interpreting consumer data by recording their subconscious responses. Like, there is a belief that only 2% brain energy is spent on conscious activity, which means 98% of the brain's energy is spent on subconscious and unconscious activities, which basically gives us a very alarming fact that we have been wasting our time only catering to the 2% brain energy, which does not give us any results or any output. Now, what basically does EEG do is that there are around 40 electrosensors on the head, face and fingers, and through various marketing stimuli, when it is exposed to the consumers, the EEG machine or the hat actually measures brain's electrical impulses and figures out that which area of the brain is triggered by which marketing stimuli. Now, you can see in these images, these are the kind of headgears that are being developed for EEG. This is a much older version. This is the newer version for the EEG headgear. They basically, when they are combined with eye tracking methods, it focuses on what are the points, like if the consumer is exposed to a particular product packaging, what is the emotional response that comes out of him. And because of these things, we get much more insights on how and what makes a consumer pick up a product from the shelf or ignore it completely. Now, how is this data basically used? It is basically used to determine what part of an ad, is it still or moving, which shows highest engagement. So basically, when an ad is shown to a consumer, we try and figure out which part of the brain activates more. A. B. It also tries to figure out what part of that ad, whether a moving part of the ad or a still in the entire ad campaign, which is showed to the consumer, generates maximum activity and shows highest level of engagement from the customers. Now, it actually measures the engagement on three terms, that is attention, that is how much attention is generated, what is the attention level that a consumer gives to a particular activity, retention, how much does the consumer remember about the particular aspect that they've got engaged to, and emotion, what is the emotion that was generated in their minds when they saw the ad campaign. So these are the three measures to gauge their engagement in terms of marketing stimuli. We'll look at a few examples on how neuromarketing has actually helped several companies increase their businesses multifold. First is Campbell's Soup. Campbell's Soup is actually a world-renowned soup brand, and they have several different types of soups in American markets. The problem with Campbell's Soups was their sales figures were actually not rising. They had actually hit stagnation after a particular point in time. And whenever they conducted a traditional market research of having focus groups or depth interviews or surveys, they found out that consumers actually liked their soups and they loved the brand and they associated with the brand at a much more higher level. But when it came to actual real buying experience, whatever the research showed and whatever the actual consumer experience showed the company, it was entirely different. Even when they are facing with a stack full or a shelf full of Campbell's Soup tins, consumers did not actually buy it. And they were actually trying to figure out what was the reason behind this issue. Now, one of the facts that they got to know was that consumers actually had a very positive feeling about the product. They had actually been consuming Campbell's Soups from their childhood, and several consumers have been doing that, and they associated this brand with, that whenever I was unwell, my mother used to make Campbell soup for me. So that is the kind of association they had. But the most intriguing fact was, in spite of having such strong emotional connection, Campbell soup tins were still lying on the shelf and nobody was willing to take it. So the various teams conducted, various kind of neuromarketing techniques at various stages for the test subjects. So there was a deep interview process done, that is the ZMET test. They had also started recording in-store consumer behavior. So they basically made consumers wear an EEG cap or an eye tracking device, and they sent them in the store to find out what is their reaction when they look at Campbell soups. They also did a lot of biometrics in terms of facial recognition, emotional capture, and all of these things. Now, what they identified was that the packaging was a major problem which triggered a negative response to the product. Now, this is how Campbell soup changed its packaging. Now, what you see here, the smaller image is the older label packaging. You can see that their name, the kind of soup that is, and the image is there. Now, based on this, they completely changed their soups. Now, they categorized several products. They had several different types of soups. So, they categorized it under various categories. So, one of them was a classic favorites. They also added steam to their image. If you see in this image, that is just a soup with a spoon on it. But when they did neuromarketing studies, they figured out that consumers actually related a lot and they had a lot of positive emotion to an image of a soup which was piping hot, which gave them a very warm and happy feeling. And that is why they added steam to the image. They also removed the spoon because consumers actually did not relate to the spoon and they felt that the spoon did not play any role to it. They also changed the bowl, the kind of bowl that is there in, when the soup is placed. So this gave the consumers a much more personalized, a warm feeling, and they actually showed a positive response towards this label. One more striking factor is that they removed the logo from the top of the packaging to the bottom. Now, when they did an eye tracking study, they realized that when the image or the logo of Campbell's was on the top of the packaging, consumers had a problem differentiating between various types of soups, and they felt that all the soups kept in the shelf are of the same type. So they basically removed the logo from the top and placed it in the bottom and only mentioned the type of the soup on the top. This was one of the reasons how Campbell's soup, one of the ways in which Campbell's soup actually increased their sales. Another example is one of the oldest and the most famous brand wars in the world, which is Coca-Cola versus Pepsi. Now, a study was conducted, to understand what are the thought processes that are going behind, when people are actually choosing between Coca-Cola and Pepsi. And the researchers actually had 67 people whose brains were scanned when they were given a blind taste test, which means they were given cola drinks without telling them which one was which one was a Pepsi, which one was a Coke. Now, basis that, what the results showed was actually astounding. Now, the results showed that half of the test subjects chose Pepsi. Pepsi also produced a strong activity in their prefrontal cortex of the brain, which is basically associated with our feeling of reward or happiness. So Pepsi did give a very positive response. But the next stage of the test was where they were actually told which brand of cola they were consuming. The moment they were told that they were consuming Coca-Cola or they were consuming Coke, 3/4 of the test subjects said that Coke was better. So even the ones who regarded Pepsi as a better tasting cola drink than Coke earlier in the blind test regarded Coke as a much better tasting product in comparison to Pepsi. They also showed that the moment the consumers were told that it was that the drink that they were having was Coke, not only did the prefrontal cortex of the brain show activity, another part of the brain was also activated, which was known as the hippocampus, which is associated with our memories. That also showed a higher activity. So what does all of this actually come out to? The conclusion is that ideally Pepsi should have 50% of the market share as per the blind test, which means everyone loved the taste. Half of the market loved Pepsi, half of the market loved Coke. But what the entire neuromarketing exercise told us that the consumers, though they loved Pepsi in a blind test, but whenever they were drinking Coke, they were not drinking Coke only because of the taste. They were also drinking Coke and they were liking Coke because of some kind of experience that they had associated with the brand. and that helped them, or that made them feel that the taste of Coke was much more enhanced in terms of Pepsi. So this is the impact that, on an emotional level that we have, or this is how consumers actually think in the market. And this was actually an insight, a very, very valuable insight for these cola brands. Frito-Lay. This is one of the most famous snack manufacturing companies, in the world. Now, the problem they had was that they found out in a study that, that women actually consumed snacks twice as that of men. And they wanted to see if their baked chips were, showed a much better uptake from the women consumers in their target segment. But somehow Frito-Lays could not appeal to the women consumers in the target segment. And they were trying to figure out why this happened. Now, neuromarketing studies, when they conducted on various men and women, they found out that women have a much more evolved communication center than the men. And they are much more, adept at processing complex ads and complex messages compared to men. And one more aspect in the research that showed was that in a particular area of the brain, activity was much higher as compared to others, which was the anterior cingulate cortex. Now, this particular part of the brain is associated with our feeling of guilt. So what basically meant was the moment these consumers were either given a packet of chips, or they were showed a marketing stimuli or a marketing campaign about Frito-Lay and this baked chips, their feeling of guilt was induced in the women. And that was an eye-opener for Frito-Lay, because they never knew that even a product which is as healthy as a baked chips could induce a feeling of guilt. And they tried to figure out what was the reason behind it. So what they found was that the packaging induced a feeling of guilt. Earlier, Ruffles Lays or Frito-Lay could actually only have packaging which is glossy, and anything that is glossy was associated with being oily. So what they did was they toned down the packaging, they reduced the glossy yellow and gave it a matte finish, a rough finish. They also showed off their healthy ingredients on the covering, on the packaging, and they used cartoons from prominent TV shows which women were more prone to watch. They used cartoons from those TV shows and made ad campaigns which the target audience could relate to more. You can see in these images, they have actually reduced the glossiness on every pack that they have. So they have a baked chips and they have made it a little more matte, and they have used popular English TV shows, cartoon characters to promote their chips. So this is how they used neuromarketing in their product enhancement and packaging enhancement. Now, there are certain controversies that are associated with this concept. Not everything is well accepted out here. So firstly, some of the researchers say that this is a pseudo-science, which means that it actually does not count into being a very scientific way of marketing because of the lack of information. Now, why is there a lack of information? It is because companies are withholding data from public, and it is deliberately done by these companies to keep the negative perceptions, at bay. Otherwise, people consider that that neuromarketing is nothing but mind control and manipulation of human thoughts, and it creates negative goodwill, negative name for these companies in the market. So to avoid these things, results are not, the process is not released to the public. That information of the entire experiment is not released to the public. The only thing that are released are the ROIs, or the return on investments that they get after they have implemented this particular strategy. So there is a reason why people actually call it a pseudoscience. Some also call it brainwashing. There are several experts who believe that neuromarketing is indirectly brainwashing consumers, which means they are misusing emotions. So there can be a possibility that they are attracting consumers to a product which may not have that kind of quality or value, just because they triggered a particular emotion in the consumers. So there are some people who actually consider this particular aspect in marketing as a way of brainwashing consumers into buying products which are of substandard quality, or which are of not as good quality as they claim to be, or as the emotions may trigger them to believe in. There are also certain ethical concerns. Like, there are certain questions that are coming out in the market, like, should marketers have access to our unconscious minds? Now, the moment marketers have access to unconscious minds, it does not restrict them to only look for information that they feel is necessary for their product. they can actually delve more and more deeper into our minds and try to understand those small fears and hidden emotions that we have towards several aspects. Now that results in a huge privacy concern. Another question is that should the technologies be limited to adult consumers? Now there is nothing, no regulation that says that this technology should only be limited to adult consumers. Even children can go through these kind of tests, which creates a much bigger impact, which is like we can actually harm these children by playing with their emotions. That is what an ethical concern is. Thirdly, who should determine the standards and regulations? There is not a single body that has come forward and accepted responsibility to develop standardized procedures for neuromarketing concepts. And should the businesses be forced to disclose use? Now, businesses can actually withhold this information, but because people are calling it a pseudo-science and brainwashing technique, the companies are now being forced to expose this information, which may also result in privacy concerns for the test subjects on whom they conducted the research. Now, how can these businesses be protected from faulty claims and large expenditures of money? Now, because they know the emotion that triggers a particular response from a particular consumer, they can use this information to promote substandard products. How will we prevent this? There are several of these ethical concerns that goes around in terms of neuromarketing as a concept. But what is the truth behind it? The truth is that it is neither pseudoscience nor mind control. It is neither of this. It is a little ambiguous and it is a little complicated for people to understand, and that is the reason why people and experts are actually giving it the name of pseudoscience and mind control. There are other businesses who have actually used marketing in harmful ways. They are actually doing it even now. Producers of addictive products like tobacco, alcohol, and even video games on certain levels are actually using emotional level of gaming, emotional level of advertising to promote their products. So neuromarketing cannot be held responsible for these things, because there are already consumers being exposed to products like these from manufacturers who are playing with their emotions. Now, basically, neuroscience has the potential to advance our existing knowledge about consumers' decision-making process. Now, it can be applied in various ways. It can be applied in education. It can be applied in getting better products designed by actually understanding their motivations and desires about a product. It can also create better usability for the product. Neuromarketing can also be used for social movements. You can actually know what is the best campaign that needs to come out for a particular social activity or a social movement that needs to change in the society. You can also educate consumers about their own irrational decision making, and in several aspects consumers make irrational decisions because of their subconscious activity. Now, consumers can be made aware of this irrational decision making if you study their brain, if you study the way their brain behaves in a particular situation. Now, there are certain cautions when we are applying neuromarketing. We need to be very careful about them. Firstly is that as more proprietary data is gathered and released, we can be more confident, we can more confidently apply the findings. But much about the brain is still unknown. Our brain is a very complex organ. And how much ever you try to study whichever cortex and whatever of the particular brain, you will find that there are several aspects about the brain that is still not understandable for us. And data from neuromarketing is still best used when it is associated with traditional data. So only relying on neuromarketing for your ad campaigns, I would call it foolish. You need to actually collaborate it with the traditional data that you have available for your markets, and use both these data in tandem to develop a communication technique or develop an ad campaign for yourself. And engagement with your customers does not basically guarantee conversions. Thank you.